Sculpting viewers, Rectangular back, this time with a tutorial on making some custom weapons for the knockoff Star Wars Black Series scale Royal Guard figures. They are the Royal Guards for the Emperor in Return of the Jedi. These were knockoff figures that I got from China based on the Kotobukiya statues, and yeah, they're not articulated, but they work great for what they are, but they don't come with any weapons. So I made some custom weapons, had some people ask me how I did it, and figured I should just do a tutorial. First, I wanted to show you the tools and materials that you're going to need to make these weapons. On the left here we have a bamboo skewer, and that's what we're going to use to make the handle. Then the blade is made from a property flag, which you can get a bundle at any hardware store like Home Depot, Lowe's. They're used for marking your property if you're going to be doing any kind of utility digging, that kind of stuff, or marking your property lines. And this is just a piece of it. They're about 2 feet long. And then you're going to need some painter's tape or masking tape. I think painter's tape is a little bit easier to deal with, maybe a little bit easier to cut. I guess you could use masking tape as well, but this is what you're going to use to make the rings on the top of the weapon. And then you're going to need some epoxy sculpt, which we have over here. Comes in 2 parts, and you mix it together. And you could also use Milliput, and there's other brands of epoxy sculpt or sculpting material. Basically, you mix it together, and then it starts to harden after about an hour. So you kind of have to plan out how you're going to work, because you don't want to mix a whole bunch of material together and then not have your blades ready, or whatever you're working with ready to add the sculpt to, because then it's going to harden and just go to waste. So keep that in mind, that you do kind of need to strategize how and when you sculpt. You don't want to get interrupted, get called to dinner or something, and then it's going to harden on you. So next we have some super glue, and thanks to my friend Billy Mahoney, who's been kind of my mentor or coach in a lot of my custom projects. I'll put a link to his channel below, and he does, or to his website, he does a lot of excellent work with preparing figures and doing customs. So thank you, Billy, for that. This is Loctite super glue, which he recommended. I used both the gel control and the regular ultra liquid control. The gel control works really well for putting into a cavity that you want to fill, because if you just use liquid, it's all just going to pool at the bottom of whatever you're working with, and may not adhere to a large surface. So I like gel control, because since it is a gel, it will kind of cake to whatever you're putting it on and kind of adhere to a larger area. So, experiment, see what you like to use, and go with that is my recommendation. Then for holding things to let them dry, I use these reverse pliers, which you can get at a hardware store for just a couple dollars, and they work really well. I'd recommend putting like a paper towel or something if you have something delicate in there, so because it does crimp a little bit tight, so you might bend or scratch, especially if something's been freshly painted. So just keep that in mind. And speaking of paint, for this project I just used Model Masters. It's very good paint. It's not that hard to find, and it's acrylic, cleans up easily, water soluble. You're going to need some silver paint, which we have here, some black paint, gray primer. You can use, whatever color primer you like, but I definitely recommend using a primer. And then a clear coat to protect the paint once it's dried. And for brushes, I like these Princeton Art and Brush Company brushes. I recommend using a wide brush to cover the large areas, because you're going to need to paint the entire thing silver. And then when you clear coat, just something that's got a nice wide brush stroke works well for making it smooth. And then for the finer details of the handles, I recommend using something with like a 0 point, or maybe a 1, or just under a 0. But yeah, the smaller the number, the finer the point on the brush. And then for cutting, you're going to need an X-Acto knife or model knife of some kind. And then for sanding, recommend just getting some cheap nail files like this from the dollar store. You can come in a pack of like 4. And then in your automotive section of your hardware store, or even an auto supply store, is where I found this stuff. Sandpaper comes in different grits, but I found that the automotive sandpaper works really nice. And then this is actually a sharpening tool that I think I got from the dollar store with a pack of blades. And this is good for a nice flat surface for sanding, like the bottoms of the weapon when you get done cutting them. And for drilling the hole in the bottom, you're going to need a Dremel with a very small point. Hopefully it's going to show up on camera. But I found this one works the best. Number one, I really recommend, thanks to Billy again for the advice on the Dremel, the stylus Dremel. It gives you a lot of control with this pistol grip. Most of them come just in a cylinder, and I have a very hard time believing that you get more control this way than to have the actual pistol grip like this. So I highly recommend this. And using this fine tipped burr, I don't know what size that is, but basically you're going to take your bamboo and put a hole in the bottom here, and you don't want to you want to make sure that you stay really straight when you're adding the hole, and you don't want to grip it too close because this gets super hot. Basically it catches on fire. And initially I was using this bit. You can see how it's discolored because basically it burned it. This is tapered, so it's a lot wider at the end. So it actually causes a lot more friction than just having this very small burr at the end. So you can see the comparison there. Highly recommend just using the smaller one, and try to go in as absolutely straight as possible, because if you're it's very easy to nick the sides and get a hole when you're drilling deep in there. Basically you just want to go to the end there, maybe about a little over a centimeter, maybe 2 centimeters if you can, but just so that you can secure the blade into the weapon and not have it get all wonky on you. Alright, so with that, let's move on. First off, what you need to do is cut the ends off the bamboo to make the handles. And in order to do that, bamboo has a tendency to splinter, so you don't want to. I guess you could try using a hacksaw, but I think that the bamboo will just disintegrate on the end, and you'll have kind of a splintered mess. So I went ahead and just scored it is all the way around with my X-Acto blade, and till I got about, I don't know, 2 millimeters deep all around, and then just slowly moved it back and forth until I could twist it off, and then I could just cut that little nub off the middle. The edges around the entire surface areas where you have to worry about it splintering. So that's how I recommend going through that. And then you want to take the your Dremel, and Dremel a hole. I would say, if you can, try to go about 2 centimeters deep and as straight down through the middle of the bamboo as possible. If you start to get close to the edge, it will tear a hole in the side, and then you'll have to scrap it or add some sculpt to repair the damage. So basically, I would recommend cutting yourself a couple extras in case you do screw up. Then you just can continue on. And also, like I said, the smaller bits work better because you're not going to have quite as much surface area to create friction, which will end up burning the bamboo. So once you got your holes dremeled out into the bamboo, then you want to insert your property flags. So you want to measure those out and basically stick the bottom of the handle into the figure's hand, and you kind of have to just eyeball where the tip, it's supposed to go right above the guard's head. I think it sticks out maybe about 1 centimeter or so, and then mark it and cut them, and then you can basically cut all your blades to be that way. Basically, once you have one that you're happy with, I would try and, because you don't know the exact depth of the hole that you're going to put into the rest of the handles, I would get one that you're happy with, drill all the holes in your handles, and then just stick the entire property flag in there, and then mark it with the first one that you made that you're happy with, and then use that as your guide to trim the rest of the property flag off of your second one and your third one, etc., so that they all are consistent in the same length. Because you may not be able to get, if you cut all of your property flags at once and insert them, they may not be all the same length when you're done. So that's my tip for that. And then when you are done with getting your handles in there, you want to glue them in. I recommend using the gel super glue to fill the cavity for the hole between the hole and the blade, the handle and the blade, and then go back in with some liquid super glue to make sure it's getting all the way down to the bottom. And then next you want to get your sculpt out, your sculpting material, and you want to probably want to make, what I did basically is make a ball big enough so that when you roll it out, it is almost the width of the handle at the bottom, and then goes up about not quite halfway up the blade, maybe a third of the way up the blade, and then mash it on there and get it all the way wrapped around, and then you're gonna have to use water to moisten the sculpt and keep stretching it out, basically smoothing it out, going down so that you're going towards the blade or the tip of the blade. And it's kind of tricky because the sculpt wants to pull away from the handle, so you kind of have to keep your fingers at the bottom of the sculpt, and then use your other hand to stretch it out so that it's smooth down there. And it's going to be pretty rough. And then you're going to have to go back in and use your sandpaper. So basically, once you get the rough sculpting done for the top, then you can go back and sculpt the bulbs at the bottom. And basically got enough sculpt so that it's, oh god, I don't know how to describe it, but maybe half a centimeter wide and about the same thickness. So you just get that wrapped around, maybe like the size of a small worm, and you get that wrapped around the bottom, and then just start smoothing it out slowly with your fingers so that it's fat in the middle and then tapers down on each side. Next, once your sculpt has dried, you want to sand it down, and it's going to be a messy process. You want to get that fine grain sandpaper and just keep smoothing it down, and you want to have the figure nearby so that you can keep testing if it's going to fit in the hand of the figure. So I always recommend adding more material than you need and then sanding it down, whereas if you just use enough material and you sand it down to make it nice and smooth, it might be too much sanding and then it's going to not fit in there snug. So always go a little bit more, because you can always sand more off. And then once you've got all your sculpting done and your sanding done, then you want to work on the prongs at the top. So you're going to get your tape and get your X-Acto knife and cut a line along the edge so that you already have one straight edge, and then you just try to cut one straight line as straight as possible, probably about 2 inches in length. You may not need quite that much, maybe an inch, inch and a half. And then once you get this thin strip of tape cut, then you wrap that around the tip, and you just kind of have to eyeball it. I don't know what the precise measurements are on this, but once you get the tape adhered, then you need to get your super glue, get your liquid super glue, and put glue around the entire top edge and then the bottom edge, and that will solidify onto the blades, and then you can do the next band, and then you'll be ready for your paint. Actually, I skipped a step. On the blade length from where the sculpt ends to the tip, before you add your prongs with the tape, you want to get your sandpaper and score that along the sand. Basically, you'll end up sanding the blade anyway, because you'll have probably sculpt still stuck to it from the sculpting process. But you want to make sure that that's scored really nicely so that paint will adhere to that metal a little bit easier. Then once you've got all your sculpting done, you want to add your primer, and basically that's just going to make everything smooth, so that you don't have a big transition between the sculpt and the paint. And paint doesn't always want to stick to metal as well as it will to the wood and the sculpting material, and the tape doesn't take paint very well either. So the primer is really going to help with the paint adhering to the tape. So once you got everything primered, you let that dry at least 24 hours, and then you want to do a base coat of just silver over the entire weapon, and then let that dry for 24 hours. And then once you got all your base coat done, then you want to go and add your black to the handles. And I don't know the precise measurements. You just kind of need to eyeball it. There's black rings and silver rings throughout, and yeah, once you get the black on there, you might need to go back up and touch it up with your fine point paintbrush. And then once all the paint dries, then you want to put on some sort of protectant or sealant clear coat, and that's where your clear coat acrylic will go over the entire thing, and then you'll be done. Here we have the finished product next to some Black Series blasters for size comparison, and overall I'm pretty happy with the way these turned out. The first two on the left underneath the weapons are the original ones that I made, and on the right are the latest ones that I made with the prongs on the top a little bit more pronounced. So my customers got their pick if they prefer the prongs to be a little more subtle or a little more pronounced. The references from the movies and comics, they look a little bit different in different photos, so gives you basically whatever your preferences, you can use them to your liking. So anyway, with that, hopefully you guys like the video, you share with your friends, subscribe if you haven't already, and I always love hearing back from you guys, so please leave a comment below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys later.